So the other day, I was just lazing around getting my daily dose of YouTube as my sanity slowly slips away, when suddenly I started to get into a certain mood, a sudden craving for Batman content. And since I was feeling nostalgic, I decided to revisit some old school stuff and ended up watching a bunch of clips of Batman Beyond. This quickly put me on a one-way trip down memory lane, and before I knew it, I was watching video after video of several different shows from my childhood. Some were very endearing and served to rekindle my love for them, while others made me question whether I was diagnosed with slight autism when I was a child. One of the shows that caught my attention was something called Martin Mystery. This was absolutely 100% my shit back in the day. I remember watching this all the dang time, but don't actually remember the contents of its episodes. So, I thought it'd be a fun little activity for us to go through the first episode together in a nostalgia critic-esque style of review. Don't worry, I promise I won't open up a company and start abusing my employees or anything. Before we start, a little history lesson. This was originally an Italian comic book called Martin Mystery by Alfredo Castelli. I don't know the full build up to it, but the comic apparently gained enough traction to get its own cartoon adaptation by Marathon Media, the same production company that brought us Totally Spies, a show that I've definitely seen, but it didn't leave that much of an impression on me because I was one of those kids that thought girls had cooties and just automatically hated it. I will be making some comparisons between the cartoons and the source material, but don't worry, I will be judging the show based on its own merits and treat it as its own separate entity. So with that being said, let's get cracking, my dudes. The episode starts off on a dark and spooky night at a library located in northern France, where a father and his daughter have come to return some books. He tells her not to stray out of his sight, but she of course doesn't listen and runs off further into the building. While she was exploring, one book in particular catches her attention. The frick is wrong with this kid? Nothing's even happened yet and I'm already convinced she's possessed by a goblin or something. She uses the key to open the book. We cut back to the dad before a scream rings out and we're given the title screen. That is freaking hilarious, by the way. Don't ask me why, I'm just very easily amused. After the opening sequence, we cut to a place called Torrington Academy, where we're introduced to our main characters. Our main man of the hour, Martin, was getting his lunch from Java, the lunchman, before Martin decides to try his hand at flirting with the ladies, and fails like every cartoon main character of this kind of setting. You should really watch my video and get some pointers from me. Wink wink. We're then introduced to the final member of the trio, Diana, who takes up the role of the smart and responsible girl. Yeah, this was a common archetype for the cartoons at the time. Ben 10 had Gwen, Monster Allergy had Eleanor, and Martin Mystery had Diane. As much as it is considered a really huge cliche right now, this was pretty commonplace at the time, so I'm going to let her existence slide. The two of them argue for a bit before the two of them make a bet whether or not Martin could stay clean for the whole day. The loser would have to give Java a foot massage. Now, let's hit the brakes for a quick second and allow me to drop some facts on your asses. In the original comic, the trio were adults. Martin was an archaeologist, art historian, and several other things, while Java, although his best friend in both depictions, was a Neanderthal in the comics, while in the cartoon, he's a caveman. As for Diana, she was Martin's fiancée in the comics, while here, not only have the two of them have been aged down, but she's also changed into his stepsister instead. No, this is not anime. We are not doing this right now. Although I personally think a show starring adults would have made for a much better setting and story, but considering this was a cartoon for kids to preteens, I can kind of understand the changes. Just so we're clear, I'm not making this comparison to the comics to discredit the show or anything. I'm just putting this out there. Martin then gets a notification from his watch. The three of them hop into the fridge portal thing. Okay, why is nobody pointing this out? This is so out there. We find out that the trio are currently working for the Center, a covert organization that secretly protects the people of Earth from extraterrestrial and supernatural threats. I had to Google what exactly it is they are, by the way, because the show doesn't thoroughly explain it in the first episode. They just kinda toss you in and expect you to go along with it. Now let's get the elephant out of the room. The animation is pretty dog shit. The art style, although very detailed, is less animated than My Life Fucking Me. A lot of it is just still images being waved around the screen with some lip flaps to it occasionally. I don't remember for certain whether Totally Spies were like this or not, but this is some pretty subpar animation, which is a damn shame because like I said, the art style is very detailed, which makes the already intriguing setting even more eye-catching, but it's very easy to lose investment when you see how little mobility these characters have. They exchange greetings with their alien friend Billy before meeting up with the head of this organization, a woman who goes by the alias Mom, which stands for Miss Olivia Mandel, if you're wondering.
Oh, but you can investigate the strange disappearance of a child from a library in southern England.
Southern England, eh? Could have something to do with Stonehenge. A group of hippies disappeared there in the 70s, you know.
Why they went to you, a supposedly top-secret agency, instead of the police is beyond me. Let's not even question on how they know of your existence if you're supposed to be, I don't know, covert. So after receiving their mission, the three of them head out to the designated location where they meet up with the father at the beginning of the episode earlier. After a bit of investigation, they find some weird goop dripping out of the bookshelves.
Oopsie. Wouldn't want to get my hands dirty and lose our little bet.
Okay, we need to talk about Diana for a second. I understand the dynamic. She's supposed to be the voice of reason to counter Martin's irresponsible and reckless attitude. The problem is, Martin himself isn't a character that requires that kind of foil. Sure, he's goofy and silly at times, but for the most part, he's taking his job seriously, and is also easily the most competent one of the group.
Forget the Invisible Man. My guess is a reanimated bog body left this.
Excuse me?
Oh yeah, according to European folklore, those who met their end in the bogs often came back as mummies seeking revenge.
So with that in mind, when you make Diana just get sporadically angry for 90% of her screen time, the dynamic just doesn't work, and she ends up like a raging bitch who's getting all pissy just because Martin's having a little bit of fun while he's working. At least in the comics, it makes a little bit more sense. She was his longtime fiancé, and it was noted that Martin wasn't always faithful to her. Coupled with the fact that he's always going off on trips without letting her know, and always surrounding himself with beautiful women, I wouldn't be surprised if she was a bit moody. I know I said I wouldn't use comparisons to discredit the show, but you have to acknowledge that in the comics, Diana makes sense. In the show, she doesn't. So after a little more investigation, Martin speculates that the abductor was something called a bog body, but the three of them hear a scream and rush out of the building to see a woman on the ground. They then finally catch sight of their culprit, who appears to have captured another child, and they quickly give chase. Unfortunately, the thing manages to escape, and the trail seems to now be cold. That is, until Java makes himself useful.
So now because of our stupid bet, the trail is cold?
Not cold.
It's a book covered in bog goo. He must have found it in the library.
With the help of Martin's U-Watch, they discovered it was actually the Boogeyman who was behind all this, and that he was going to keep kidnapping naughty children. Later that night, Martin reveals his plan to use the naughtiest kids in town as bait to draw the monsters out. My freaking god, these kids are demons themselves.
Okay, it's been 10 whole seconds and nothing. I don't think the boogie guy's gonna show.
Wow, 10 whole seconds. Diana, just shut the fuck up. The plan, of course, works, and the Boogeyman shows up. They manage to avoid any more kidnapping, but the Boogeyman retreats back into his glowing anus hole, so they jump in after him, taking them to the creature's lair. Now, here we see the problem with this being a kids' show. Due to this being targeted to a younger audience, no killing or actual terrible things are allowed to happen to the characters, so it takes away any sort of sense of danger. The Boogeyman's not even eating them or anything. His main purpose of bringing the kids here was just to leave them there. There is absolutely nothing to fear here. Yeah, I take it back. They escaped the place easily enough after climbing a tree because the Boogeyman left the portal open for some goddamn reason. Once they return, the village has surrounded the Boogeyman. They fend him off as well as they can, but the problem isn't solved just yet. As a last stretch, they decide to go back to the library to find the last page of the book. Befittingly, the final battle kicks off at the place where it all started.
escape for naughty boys.
They get their asses handed to them, but they manage to find the last page and seal away the boogeyman. Not through a smart plan or anything, the dumbass quite literally just jumps back in there. Everything is settled, the town is saved, they all lived happily ever after, and Diana gives Java a foot massage. So that was Martin Mystery. Where do I even begin? Okay, here's the best way I can put it. As a show overall, it's not very good. The story is not well thought out at all. The characters are way too zany and one-dimensional, and I can't help but shake off that we're rushing through everything. The writers have so many scenes in mind, but they have so limited time, and it all just ends up looking all poorly cramped together. But the thing is, these are things that only people who have matured with taste would notice. So it makes sense that this was targeted to a younger audience who can't think too deep into things. As a kid show, it's a harmless piece of mindless entertainment that, although not being educational in any way, isn't so brain dead to the point where it'll make your child stupid. Does it hold up to the way I saw it as a child? No, absolutely not. But is it something I'd ban my kids from watching? No. If I had to pick, I'd rather they watch this than shit like Teen Titans Go or that terrible Powerpuff Girls remake.